The smell of smoke was still thick in the air when Damien Voss stepped over a broken fence and into the ruins of a border village that did not belong to him. His boots crushed ash that used to be a roof. Around him, his warriors moved through the wreckage in silence, searching for survivors of the raid that had ended only hours before. Damien did not speak. He rarely did after a fight. His eyes moved from one collapsed house to the next, counting the cost of a war he had not wanted but could not avoid. He was the Alpha King of the Blackthorn Pack, a title that carried weight heavier than any crown. Men feared him. Women whispered about him. Children were told stories about his cold eyes and his colder heart. None of it was true, not really. But Damien had stopped correcting people a long time ago. Grief had taught him that silence was safer than explanation. 5 years had passed since the fire that took his mate, Elena Hartley, from him. 5 years since he had woken to find half his life burned to nothing and the other half hollow. He had not looked for another mate. He had not wanted one. He ruled, he fought, he protected his people, and at night he lay awake remembering the sound of her laugh, a sound that no longer existed anywhere in the world, or so he believed. A cry came from somewhere near the well, sharp and small, cutting through the low murmur of his soldiers. Damien's head turned instantly, every instinct in his body snapping to attention. He moved before he thought, closing the distance in seconds, his hand already reaching for the blade at his hip. What he found was not a threat, it was a child. She could not have been older than 4, small and thin, with tangled brown hair and eyes far too old for her face. Her clothes were scorched at the edges, and her bare feet were black with soot. She was crouched beside the broken well, hugging her knees, rocking slightly the way frightened children do when there is no one left to hold them. Damien's soldiers slowed their pace, watching their king kneel in front of a stranger's child. It was not something he did. He was not a man known for gentleness, but something about the girl made him stop, made him lower his guard the way he had not lowered it for anyone in years. "You're safe now," he said, his voice quieter than the one he used on the battlefield. "No one is going to hurt you." The girl lifted her head and looked at him properly for the first time. Her nose twitched, small and quick, the same instinctive motion every shifter child made before they learned to hide it. She was not fully human. She was pack-born, like him, though from which pack he could not yet tell. She leaned forward, sniffing the air near his chest the way a pup does when trying to place a scent it does not recognize. Damien remained still, letting her. He had learned long ago that sudden movement frightened young shifters more than stillness ever could. Then she spoke, and her words hit him harder than any blade ever had. "You smell just like my mommy." For a moment, Damien could not breathe. The noise around him, the shouting of his men, the crackle of dying fires, the wind moving through broken beams, all of it disappeared. There was only the girl's voice, small and certain, repeating itself in his mind. "What did you say?" he asked, though he had heard her clearly. "You smell like my mommy," the girl said again, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. She smelled like flowers and rain. You smell the same. Elena had smelled exactly like that, flowers after rain, a scent so particular that Damien had once told her she carried her own weather with her. No one else had ever smelled like that. No one else could. He forced himself to breathe evenly, though his heart was pounding against his ribs. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Ren," the girl said. "And where is your mother, Ren?" The girl's face fell, and for a moment she looked even smaller than before. "She went to sleep and never woke up," she said. "Marla takes care of me now." Damien's jaw tightened. He kept his voice steady, though every part of him wanted answers immediately. "Who is Marla?" "She lives in the yellow house," Ren said, pointing toward a structure that had partly survived the fire, its walls scorched but still standing. "But it's not yellow anymore. The fire made it black." Damien rose slowly, careful not to startle her, and turned to his beta, a broad-shouldered man named Corin Ashford who had followed him since they were boys. Corin had seen the exchange and was already frowning, sensing that something important had just happened, even if he did not understand what. "Find this woman, Marla," Damien said quietly. "I want to speak with her before anyone else does." Corin nodded and moved off without questioning the order, though the look he gave Damien carried a silent request for explanation later. Damien ignored it for now. His mind was too full of one impossible thought to focus on anything else. He knelt again, this time closer to Ren, studying her face carefully. Her eyes were a shade of green he recognized instantly, the same green Elena's had been, the kind that shifted lighter or darker depending on her mood. Her jaw had a small curve to it, subtle but familiar, the same shape as his own mother's had been, a trait Elena used to say she hoped their future children would inherit. He had told himself for years that he would never have children, not without Elena, not with anyone else. He had accepted that particular loss the way he accepted all the others, quietly and completely. But looking at Ren now, he was no longer certain what he believed. "How old are you, Ren?" he asked. She held up 4 fingers proudly. "I'm this many." 4 years old. Elena had died 5 years ago, in the spring, during a raid eerily similar to the one Damien had just survived. If Ren had been born shortly after that, if she had spent months growing inside her mother before the fire took Elena's life, the timeline was close enough to steal the air from his lungs. Too close to ignore, too close to be an accident. "Ren," he said carefully, "do you remember anything else about your mommy? Anything at all?" The girl thought hard, her small face scrunched in concentration. "She used to sing to me before I was born," she said. "Marla told me that. She said Mommy used to sing even though I couldn't hear her yet." Damien's chest tightened painfully. Elena used to sing, always slightly off tune, always laughing at herself when she forgot the words. It was one of the small, ordinary things about her that he had missed the most. "She also said Mommy was very brave," Ren continued. "She said Mommy ran a long way to keep me safe, even though she was hurt very badly." The words landed like a blow. Ran a long way, hurt very badly. Not died in a fire where she stood. Not lost in an instant, the way Damien had been told for 5 years. He had been told Elena died trapped inside a burning house during an enemy raid, her body found too badly damaged to properly identify, confirmed only by the belongings left at the scene. He had mourned based on that story. He had built 5 years of grief around it. If Ren's account was true, the story he had been given was a lie. "Where is Marla now?" he asked again, more urgently this time. "She said not to leave the well," Ren said. "She said stay very still and very quiet, no matter what happens." A chill moved through Damien that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. Someone had told this child to hide, to stay silent, to remain unnoticed during chaos. That was not simple caution, that was the careful instruction of someone protecting a secret. Corin returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. "The house Ren pointed to is empty," he reported. "No sign of a woman matching that description, but there are supplies inside, meant for a much longer stay than a single family passing through. Dried food, medicine, a locked chest we haven't opened yet." Damien stood, his gaze drifting toward the blackened house in question. Everything about this situation felt deliberately hidden, layered with secrets someone had worked hard to protect. "Search it properly," Damien ordered. "Nothing is touched until I see it myself." "And the girl?" Corin asked, glancing at Ren, who had gone quiet again, watching the adults with careful, wary eyes far too knowing for someone her age. Damien looked down at her, and something inside him, some old defense he had built over 5 long years of numbness, cracked slightly. "She comes with me," he said. "Until we understand what happened here, she is not out of my sight." Ren looked up at him, her small nose twitching again as she caught his scent more fully now that he stood closer. "You really do smell like her," she whispered. "Are you sad too?" Damien knelt one final time, meeting her eyes directly. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I have been sad for a very long time." "Marla says being sad means you love someone a lot," Ren said simply. "She's right," Damien said, his voice rough. "I loved someone a lot." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished. She did not. Instead, she allowed him to lift her carefully, settling against him as though some instinctive part of her recognized safety in his arms, the same way pack instincts recognized family long before logic could explain why. As Damien carried her away from the ruined well, his mind raced through possibilities he had refused to consider in 5 years. A staged death, a hidden pregnancy, an enemy inside his own walls willing to lie about the worst night of his life. He did not yet have proof, he did not yet have names or answers, but he had a scent that should not exist, a child who should not be alive, and a story about running and hiding that did not match the fire he had been told killed the only woman he had ever loved. Whatever the truth was, Damien intended to find it, no matter how deep it had been buried, or who had worked so hard to bury it. Behind him, his soldiers began breaking down the locked chest inside the ruined house, unaware that the answers within it were about to unravel 5 years of carefully constructed lies. The locked chest resisted the crowbar for only a moment before the wood around its hinges gave way, splintering with a sharp crack that echoed through what remained of the yellow house. Corin Ashford knelt beside it, lifting the broken lid carefully, while two other soldiers stood guard at the doorway, watching the darkening sky for any sign of renewed danger. Damien stood a few steps back, Wren still resting against his shoulder, her small body finally beginning to relax now that exhaustion had caught up with fear. Inside the chest were folded clothes far too small for an adult, a handful of children's toys carved from soft wood, and beneath them, wrapped in a strip of faded cloth, a bundle of letters tied together with string. Corin lifted the bundle out slowly and held it toward Damien without a word, understanding without being told that these were not ordinary letters. Damien shifted Wren's weight gently, settling her onto a nearby chair that had somehow survived the fire mostly intact. She was already drifting toward sleep, her small fingers curled loosely against the armrest, worn out from a day no child should have had to endure. He took the letters from Corin and untied the string with careful hands, aware that whatever truth they held had waited 5 years to be found. The handwriting on the first letter was unmistakable. He would have known it anywhere, in any lifetime. Elena's writing slanted slightly to the right, her letters rounded in a way she always said made her handwriting look childish, though Damien had always found it beautiful. He had kept every note she ever wrote him, tucked away in a drawer he could no longer bring himself to open. His hands trembled slightly as he read the first lines. "If you are reading this, then something has gone wrong, and I did not survive long enough to explain everything myself. I am writing this in case that happens, so that whoever finds our daughter knows the truth of where she came from, and why I had to disappear." Damien's breath caught painfully in his chest. Our daughter. Elena had known she was carrying his child, she had known, and she had never told him, which meant she had been forced into silence by something or someone far more dangerous than the raid he had been told killed her. He continued reading, forcing his eyes to move steadily across words that felt like they were tearing something open inside him. "I discovered I was pregnant only weeks before the attack that everyone believes killed me. I did not tell Damien because I feared what would happen if the wrong people learned of it first. There are those within our own pack who would see a child of mine as a threat to their ambitions, and I could not risk our baby's life by trusting the wrong person with the truth too soon." Damien's jaw tightened as understanding began to take shape, cold and unwelcome. Elena had been afraid, not of enemies outside Blackthorn territory, but of someone inside it, someone close enough to pose a genuine threat to a pregnant mate and an unborn child. He kept reading. "The night of the fire was not what it seemed. I was warned only hours before that the attack was coming, and that it would be used to hide something far worse than an enemy raid. I do not know everything, but I know enough to understand that someone wanted me dead before I could give birth, and wanted it to look like an accident of war rather than what it truly was." Damien's grip on the letter tightened until the old paper nearly tore beneath his fingers. 5 years of grief, 5 years of believing Elena's death was simply the terrible cost of conflict, and now he was holding proof that her death had been planned, engineered, disguised as misfortune by someone clever enough to fool an entire pack, including its own alpha. "I ran that night, further than I had ever run before, injured and terrified, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to protect our child. I do not know if I will survive long enough to raise her myself, but I trust that if anyone finds these letters, they will understand that our daughter is innocent of everything, and that she deserves to be protected no matter what truths come to light because of her existence." The letter ended there, though a second one continued beneath it, written in a hand that shook more than the first, suggesting it had been composed later, likely closer to whatever moment marked Elena's true fate. "I have found someone willing to help me. Her name is Marla, and she has agreed to raise my daughter as her own if I do not survive. I have asked her to keep the truth hidden until it is safe to reveal it, however long that may take. I am naming our daughter Wren, after the small bird that used to nest outside our window, the one you always said reminded you of me because it sang even when the world around it grew dark." Damien's throat tightened painfully. He remembered that Wren, remembered pointing it out to Elena one quiet morning, remembered her laughing softly and saying the bird had more courage than most warriors she knew. He had not thought of that memory in years. Now it felt like Elena had reached across 5 years of silence to hand him back a piece of the life he thought had ended completely. "I do not know who to trust completely, not even within our own walls, but I trust Damien's love for me, and I trust that if he ever learns the truth, he will move heaven and earth to protect our daughter. Tell him I am sorry for the silence. Tell him it was never meant to last this long. Tell him I loved him until my very last breath, and that if there is any way for me to return to him, I will find it, no matter how far I must travel or how long it takes." The letter ended abruptly there, the final words trailing slightly, as though written in haste or under pain. Damien lowered the pages slowly, staring at nothing for a long moment while Corin watched him carefully, unwilling to break the silence until his king was ready to speak. "She's alive," Damien finally said, his voice rough with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "Or she was after the fire. She survived long enough to write this. Or someone wants us to believe that," Corin said carefully, always the more cautious of the two, though his tone carried no doubt about the sincerity of what he had just heard. Damien shook his head slowly. "This is her handwriting. This is her voice. I would know it anywhere." He looked toward Ren, still curled asleep in the chair, unaware that the truth of her entire existence had just been confirmed in ink and old paper. "And that is our daughter, Corin. Not a stranger's child, mine and Elena's." Corin exhaled slowly, glancing toward Ren with new understanding shading his expression. If someone inside Blackthorn orchestrated the fire to eliminate Elena and prevent an heir from being born, that person is still likely within our ranks, he said quietly, possibly still in a position of influence. "Which means Ren has been in danger every day of her life," Damien said, his voice hardening into something colder and more dangerous than grief. "And so has Elena, wherever she is now." He gathered the letters carefully, folding them with the same care Elena had once used to write them, and tucked them safely inside his coat. Whatever answers remained hidden, whatever names had yet to surface, Damien intended to uncover every one of them, methodically and without mercy for whoever had spent 5 years hiding the truth from him. "Find Marla," he said again, more urgently this time. "She is the only living person who might know exactly what happened that night, and exactly who I need to hunt down." Corin nodded, and moved to organize a wider search, calling additional warriors to comb through the surrounding forest and nearby villages, for any trace of the woman who had risked her own safety to protect Elena's daughter. Damien returned to Ren's side, kneeling beside the chair where she slept, studying her face in the fading evening light. She had Elena's eyes, his own jaw, and a courage that neither of her parents' enemies had managed to extinguish despite everything they had apparently tried to do. "I promise you," he whispered, quiet enough that only she might have heard it even half asleep, "whoever did this to your mother, whoever tried to take you both from me, will answer for it, and I will find her. I will find your mother, no matter how long it takes or how far I have to go." Outside, the search for Marla continued into the darkening evening, warriors moving carefully through wreckage and forest alike, unaware that the woman they sought was watching them from a hidden distance, torn between the promise she had made to protect Ren's secret and the growing certainty that the truth could no longer stay buried. Somewhere beyond the tree line, hidden in shadow, Marla clutched a worn cloak tightly around herself and watched the King of Blackthorn carry her charge toward safety, praying silently that revealing herself now would not undo the very protection she had spent 5 years building around a child who was never meant to be found so soon. Marla waited until the last of the search torches had drifted deeper into the tree line before she allowed herself to step out from behind the wide trunk of an old oak, her legs shaking beneath her long cloak. She had spent 5 years preparing for the possibility that this day would come, yet now that it had arrived, every rehearsed plan felt useless against the fear pressing tightly against her chest. She moved quietly toward the ruined village, staying low, watching for any soldier who might mistake her for a threat rather than someone finally ready to surrender a secret she had carried alone for far too long. When she reached the edge of the clearing near the broken well, she saw him clearly for the first time, the Alpha King himself, kneeling beside Ren, who slept peacefully against a folded cloak someone had laid out for her. Marla's breath caught at the sight of him. She had heard stories of Damien Voss for years, delivered by travelers and frightened villagers alike, stories that painted him as merciless and untouchable. Yet watching him now, gently brushing hair away from a sleeping child's face, she saw none of the cruelty she had been warned about. She saw only exhaustion, grief, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. She stepped forward, and a nearby soldier immediately raised his weapon, calling out sharply. Damien's head turned instantly, his hand rising to signal his warrior to stand down before the man could react further. "Wait," Damien said firmly, his eyes locking onto the woman emerging from the shadows. "Let her approach." Marla's legs nearly failed her as she walked the remaining distance, stopping several feet away, unwilling to come any closer without permission. Her hands trembled visibly, though her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a strength that surprised even herself. "My name is Marla Doyle," she said. "I believe you have been searching for me." Damien rose slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping child beside him, and studied the woman before him, with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You've been raising my daughter," Damien said. It was not a question. Marla's eyes filled with tears she had held back for longer than she could remember. Yes, she admitted quietly. For 5 years, I have protected her as though she were my own. Exactly as her mother asked me to. Then you knew Elena, Damien said, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent. You knew her personally. Marla nodded, wiping at her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. I found her the night of the fire, deep in the forest north of here, badly injured and barely conscious. She was already in labor, far too early, and terrified out of her mind. I was a healer then, traveling between villages, and fate placed me on that particular path at that particular hour. I have wondered every day since whether it truly was fate, or whether something guided me there on purpose. Tell me everything, Damien said, from the beginning. I need to understand exactly what happened that night. Marla drew a steadying breath and began, her voice growing stronger as the story unfolded, as though speaking it aloud after 5 years of silence lifted a physical weight from her shoulders. Elena told me she had been warned only hours before the attack began, though she did not know who had warned her, only that the message came from someone inside your own pack, someone loyal enough to risk everything to save her life. She was told the raid would be used as cover for something else entirely, an attempt to eliminate her before she could give birth to an heir that certain individuals did not want to see born. Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides, anger simmering beneath years of careful control. Did she know who was behind it? Did she give you a name? Marla hesitated, glancing briefly toward Ren before answering. She suspected someone close to you, someone with much to lose if you had an heir of your own blood. She never said a name outright, not clearly, though she mentioned once, in her fevered state, someone she called Rourke, spoken with such fear that I never forgot it, even though I did not understand its significance until much later. The name landed like a blow. Rourke Kane, Damien's own cousin, a man who had stood beside him since childhood, a man who would inherit leadership of Blackthorn Pack should Damien die without an heir of his own. The suspicion had been forming in Damien's mind since Corin first raised the possibility, but hearing it confirmed, even indirectly, made his blood run cold with fury. Continue, Damien said, his voice tight with restrained anger. She gave birth in a small shelter. I built quickly from fallen branches and whatever cloth I carried. Marla continued. It was not safe, and it was not gentle, but Ren was born healthy despite everything her mother had endured. Elena held her only briefly before her injuries worsened. She told me she could not risk staying with her daughter, not while pursuers might still be searching for her. She believed that if she was found alive, both she and Ren would be killed before you ever learned the truth. So she left, Damien said quietly, understanding dawning painfully across his features. She left Ren with you to keep her safe, and disappeared to draw danger away from her own child. Marla nodded, tears falling freely now. She made me promise to raise Ren as my own, to keep her identity hidden until it was safe to reveal the truth. She said if she survived long enough, she would find a way to return for her daughter eventually, once she believed the threat had passed. I have not seen her since that night, though I have received brief signs over the years, small indications that she remains alive somewhere, hiding just as carefully as I have hidden Ren. Damien's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and desperate longing. Elena was alive, or had been recently enough for Marla to receive some sign of her survival. 5 years of grief had been built upon a lie so carefully constructed that even his own instincts had been fooled. What kind of signs? He asked urgently. A message left occasionally at a designated location, always brief, always unsigned, but written in a way only Elena and I would recognize, Marla explained. The most recent one arrived only weeks ago, warning me that danger was closing in again, that I should be prepared to move Ren somewhere safer if necessary. Damien's stomach turned uneasily, which means whoever orchestrated the original attack may have learned that Elena survived, or that Ren exists. Marla nodded gravely. I fear that is exactly what happened. I believe the raid on this village tonight may not have been random at all. I believe it may have been intended to draw Ren out of hiding, or to eliminate her before her existence became public knowledge. The realization settled over Damien like ice water. The attack that had brought him to this village, the very raid he had ridden out to defend against, may have been a deliberate attempt to reach his own daughter before he ever learned she existed. Someone had been watching Ren and Marla for far longer than he had realized, waiting for the right opportunity to finish what they had started 5 years earlier. You need to come with me, Damien said firmly, both of you. I cannot protect either of you if you remain hidden out here alone, vulnerable to whoever is still hunting Elena's bloodline. Marla glanced hesitantly toward Ren, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of how dramatically her life was about to change. She trusts very few people, Marla said softly. It will take time for her to understand everything that is happening. Then we will give her that time, Damien said, his voice softening slightly as he looked toward his sleeping daughter. But she cannot stay unprotected any longer. Not now that I know the truth. Marla nodded slowly, exhaustion and relief mixing plainly across her weathered features. There is one more thing you should know, she said carefully. Something Elena told me the night Ren was born. Something I have never repeated to another living soul until now. Damien's attention sharpened instantly. Tell me. Marla's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as though even now, surrounded by loyal soldiers, she feared being overheard by the wrong ears. Elena believed the person who wanted her dead was not acting alone. She believed there was someone even more dangerous standing behind Rourke, someone whose identity she never managed to uncover before she was forced to flee. Damien's jaw tightened as a cold realization settled over him. If Marla was right, Rourke Kane was not the true architect of Elena's suffering, merely a piece within a much larger and more dangerous scheme, one that had remained hidden and unpunished for 5 long years, growing bolder with every season that passed undetected. Whatever conspiracy had tried to destroy his family before it ever truly began was still active, still watching, and quite possibly still planning its next move against the daughter Damien had only just discovered existed. The journey back to Blackthorn territory began before dawn, when the sky still held onto darkness and the forest around them remained thick with shadow. Damien had ordered a small, tightly guarded convoy, unwilling to risk drawing attention with a large formation that might alert whoever had been watching Marla and Ren for years without detection. Corin rode close beside him, alert and tense, while Marla sat inside a covered wagon with Ren curled against her side, still adjusting to the sudden upheaval of everything she had ever known. Damien rode at the front, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, every instinct sharpened by the knowledge that his daughter's life had already been targeted once, and could easily be targeted again. He had lost Elena to hidden enemies within his own walls. He refused to lose Ren the same way. They had traveled only a few hours when the first sign of trouble appeared. Corin raised a closed fist sharply, signaling the convoy to halt, his nostrils flaring as he caught a scent carried faintly on the morning breeze. Wolves, Corin said quietly. Not ours. Damien's hand moved instantly to his weapon, his gaze sweeping the surrounding forest with practiced precision. How many? Difficult to say, Corin replied, his voice tight with concentration. At least 6, moving parallel to us, matching our pace exactly. That kind of coordinated movement was not accidental. Wild wolves did not track a convoy with such precision, and rival shifters seeking easy prey would have already made their intentions known through more obvious means. This was deliberate surveillance, careful and patient, exactly the kind of behavior Damien would expect from trained warriors under strict orders. They're watching us, Damien said grimly, waiting for an opportunity. He turned his horse toward the wagon, lowering his voice as he addressed Marla through the canvas covering. Stay low and keep Ren calm. Whatever happens, do not leave this wagon unless I say so myself. Marla's face paled, but she nodded firmly, pulling Ren closer against her side. The little girl, sensing the shift in tension among the adults around her, remained unusually quiet, her small hand gripping Marla's sleeve tightly. Damien signaled his warriors to tighten their formation around the wagon, forming a protective circle that would be difficult to breach without significant cost to any attacker. He had faced ambushes before, countless times throughout years of conflict, but never with stakes this personal, never with his own daughter's safety hanging in the balance. The attack came suddenly, without warning cries or dramatic announcement, the way skilled assassins preferred to strike. Shapes burst from the tree line on both sides simultaneously, moving with the swift, coordinated precision of trained fighters rather than desperate bandits seeking easy plunder. Damien met the first attacker head-on, his blade flashing in the early morning light as he deflected a strike aimed toward his exposed side. His years of experience took over instantly, muscle memory guiding his movements even as his mind raced through calculations about numbers, positioning, and the safety of the wagon behind him. Corin fought beside him, matching each attacker's movement with practiced efficiency, though even he could not hide the strain evident in his expression as more shapes emerged from the surrounding forest, revealing that the initial estimate of 6 attackers had significantly underestimated the true size of the ambush. They knew our route, Corin shouted over the clash of steel and the snarls of shifting warriors. This wasn't random. Damien did not need convincing. Someone had known exactly which path they would take, exactly when they would be most vulnerable. Information that could only have come from someone with access to his private plans. Someone close enough to know his movements before he made them public even to most of his own council. A cry from the wagon sent ice through Damien's veins. He turned sharply to see two attackers breaking through the outer defensive line, moving directly toward the wagon where Marla and Ren remained hidden. Without hesitation, he abandoned his current opponent and moved with a speed born of pure desperation, cutting through the distance, separating him from his daughter. He reached the wagon, just as one attacker tore back the canvas covering, revealing Marla shielding Ren with her own body, her expression fierce despite her obvious fear. Damien's blade found the attacker before the man could complete whatever motion he intended, ending the threat before it could reach either Marla or the child she protected. The second attacker turned to face him, recognition flickering across the man's features as he apparently realized exactly who he was now facing. "The king himself," the man said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "This will be worth the risk after all." "You will not touch her," Damien growled, his voice low and dangerous, carrying the full weight of 5 years of grief transformed suddenly into protective fury. The attacker lunged, but Damien moved faster, driven by something far stronger than mere combat training. This was not a battle over territory or pride. This was a father defending a daughter he had only just discovered existed, and that realization fueled a strength within him that quickly overwhelmed his opponent's confidence. Within moments, the remaining attackers began retreating, apparently realizing that whatever advantage surprise had granted them had been thoroughly exhausted against warriors fighting with such fierce determination. Damien's soldiers pursued briefly before allowing the survivors to flee, prioritizing the safety of the convoy over the pursuit of retreating enemies. As the forest fell quiet again, Damien turned immediately toward the wagon, his heart still pounding with residual fear. Marla emerged first, her face pale but otherwise unharmed, followed by Ren, who peered out cautiously before recognizing Damien and reaching toward him instinctively. He lifted her gently, checking carefully for any sign of injury, relief flooding through him when he found none. "You're safe," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You're safe." "The bad wolves are gone?" Ren asked quietly, her small voice trembling slightly despite her obvious attempt at bravery. "Yes," Damien said firmly. "They're gone, and they won't be coming back." Corin approached, his expression grim despite the successful defense. "We should search the bodies," he said quietly. "If we're fortunate, we might find something identifying who sent them." Damien nodded, though his attention remained largely fixed on Ren, unwilling to release her from his arms just yet. A quick search of the fallen attackers yielded little at first, their clothing deliberately plain and unmarked, clearly chosen to avoid identification. However, tucked inside the boot of the man who had confronted Damien directly, Corin discovered a small folded parchment bearing a wax seal that made both men go very still. The seal belonged to Rourke Kane's personal household, an emblem used only for private correspondence among his closest confidants. "This confirms it," Corin said quietly, careful to keep his voice low enough that Marla could not overhear from where she comforted a shaken Ren nearby. "Rourke is involved directly, not merely suspected." Damien's expression hardened into something colder and more determined than Corin had witnessed in years. "Then we return home, and I confront him myself," he said, "but carefully. If Elena was right, Rourke is not acting alone, and I will not tip our hand to whoever stands behind him until I understand the full scope of what we're facing." Corin nodded, folding the parchment carefully and tucking it away as evidence. "What about Ren? After this attack, she cannot simply return to ordinary pack life without significant protection." Damien looked down at his daughter, still trembling slightly from the recent violence she had witnessed far too young. "She will have protection," he said firmly. "More than that, she will have her rightful place beside me, publicly acknowledged, so that anyone who wishes to harm her understands exactly what consequences await them." As the convoy resumed its journey toward Blackthorn territory, Damien rode with Ren settled carefully in front of him, refusing to let her return to the wagon after witnessing firsthand how vulnerable it had proven to be. Marla rode close behind, watching the king and the daughter she had protected for 5 years with a complicated mixture of relief and lingering worry. The attack had confirmed one truth beyond any doubt. Someone within Blackthorn's own walls was willing to risk open violence to eliminate Elena's bloodline entirely, and that person, whoever ultimately stood behind Rourke's involvement, would not stop simply because their first attempt at ambush had failed. Damien intended to ensure they never received a second opportunity. Blackthorn Castle rose out of the morning mist like something carved from stone and memory, its dark towers familiar to Damien, in a way that usually brought comfort, rather than the wary tension now settling over him as the convoy approached the main gates. Guards along the wall called out greetings to their returning king, unaware of the danger that had followed him home, or the daughter he now carried carefully in front of him on horseback. Ren stared up at the towering structure with wide eyes, her small fingers gripping the edge of Damien's cloak as though the sheer size of her surroundings might somehow swallow her whole. Marla rode close behind, her own expression carefully guarded, aware that whatever safety this fortress offered came intertwined with political complexities she barely understood. "This is your home now," Damien said quietly to Ren as they passed through the gates, servants and guards alike pausing to stare openly at the unusual sight of their king, carrying a small child before him. "No one will hurt you here." Ren said nothing, simply pressing closer against him, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from hidden village life to the imposing grandeur of a castle she had never imagined existed. Damien dismounted carefully in the main courtyard, lifting Ren down gently before turning to assist Marla, who seemed equally uncertain about her sudden change in circumstances. Corin directed the remaining warriors to secure the perimeter and quietly investigate any additional information regarding the ambush, while Damien prepared himself for the confrontation he knew was coming the moment word of his return spread through the castle. He did not have to wait long. Rourke Kane appeared at the top of the main staircase within minutes, his expression carefully composed into practiced concern, though something in his eyes flickered with barely restrained calculation as he took in the unusual scene before him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair that ran through much of the Voss bloodline, Rourke had always carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being trusted implicitly. "Cousin," Rourke said, descending the stairs smoothly. "We heard reports of trouble along the northern border. I feared the worst when word came that your return had been delayed." Damien studied his cousin carefully, searching for any crack in the composed exterior that might reveal the truth Marla's testimony and the sealed parchment had already suggested. "We encountered difficulty," Damien said evenly, keeping his voice carefully neutral, "but we managed regardless." Rourke's gaze shifted toward Ren, who stood partially hidden behind Damien's leg, watching the exchange with wary uncertainty. "And who is this?" Rourke asked, his tone carrying just enough surprise to seem genuine, though Damien noted the slight tightening around his cousin's eyes that suggested something far less innocent. "This is Ren," Damien said simply, deliberately withholding further explanation for now. "She will be staying with us." Rourke's smile remained fixed in place, though something behind his eyes seemed to calculate rapidly, adjusting to information he clearly had not expected to receive so directly. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Any child in need of protection deserves shelter within these walls." Damien said nothing further, simply nodding once before moving past his cousin toward the private chambers he intended to prepare for Ren and Marla. He could feel Rourke's gaze following him as he walked, calculating and watchful in a way that confirmed everything Damien already suspected without providing any additional proof he could act upon immediately. Once safely within his private study, doors closed and warded against casual eavesdropping, Damien allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, processing everything that had unfolded within the span of a single day. Corin joined him shortly after, his expression grim. "He knows something," Corin said without preamble. "I watched his face carefully during that exchange. He recognized the child immediately, even before you offered her name." "I saw it too," Damien confirmed, moving toward the window that overlooked the courtyard where guards continued securing the grounds against further threats. "But recognition alone proves nothing. I need evidence connecting him directly to both the fire 5 years ago and the ambush we survived this morning." "The sealed parchment we recovered links his household to the attackers," Corin reminded him. "That should be sufficient grounds for formal questioning, at minimum." Damien shook his head slowly. "If Elena was correct, Rourke is merely a piece within something larger. If I move against him too quickly, whoever truly orchestrated this conspiracy will simply retreat further into hiding, taking whatever remaining threat they pose with them. I need to understand the full scope before acting. Meanwhile, your daughter remains a target," Corin pointed out carefully, "as does the woman who raised her. Which is why they will both remain under my direct protection, within these walls, where I can personally ensure their safety," Damien said firmly. "I will not risk Ren's life again by moving carelessly against an enemy I do not yet fully understand." A knock interrupted their conversation, and Damien's personal guard entered, bowing briefly, before delivering an update. "My lord, the healer has examined the child and the woman traveling with her. Both are physically unharmed, though the healer notes the girl shows signs of significant stress from recent events." Damien nodded, dismissing the guard before turning back toward Corin, I need to speak with Ren properly, away from the chaos of arrival. She has answers within her, memories from her early years that might help us understand exactly what Elena knew before she disappeared. And Marla? Corin asked. She stays close to Ren, Damien said. The girl trusts her completely, and after everything she has endured today, I will not force additional separation upon her without genuine necessity. As evening settled over Blackthorn Castle, Damien found himself sitting quietly in a private sitting room, Ren perched on a cushioned chair across from him, finally beginning to relax within the unfamiliar surroundings now that exhaustion and hunger had been addressed. Marla remained nearby, offering quiet reassurance whenever the little girl glanced toward her uncertainly. Ren, Damien said gently, careful to keep his tone light despite the seriousness of what he intended to ask. Do you remember anything else about the place where you used to live? Before the village? Anything Marla might have told you about your mother's journey? Ren considered the question seriously, her small brow furrowing in concentration. Marla said Mommy used to leave letters sometimes, she offered. Not for me, for someone else, somewhere far away. She said it was a secret. Damien glanced toward Marla, who nodded in confirmation, though her expression suggested there was more to this information than Ren fully understood at her young age. The messages I mentioned earlier, Marla clarified quietly. Elena arranged a system for communication years ago, before Ren was even born, in case something happened during her pregnancy. I do not know every detail, only the specific location where messages have occasionally appeared over the years. Where? Damien asked immediately, leaning forward with sharpened attention. An abandoned shrine, several days north of here, near the border, separating our territory from neutral lands, Marla explained. I have visited occasionally, always cautiously, always uncertain whether I would find anything at all. Damien's mind raced through possibilities. If Elena had established a means of communication years ago, and if that system remained active even now, it meant she was likely still monitoring it herself, still alive and aware enough to leave messages for Marla when circumstances allowed. I need to see this shrine, Damien said firmly, as soon as possible. It's dangerous, Marla warned, especially now, with whoever attacked your convoy likely aware that Ren has been found and brought to Blackthorn territory. They may be watching that location as well, anticipating exactly this kind of response. Then we proceed carefully, Damien said, but we proceed regardless. If there is even a possibility that Elena remains alive and reachable, I refuse to ignore it out of caution alone. Ren, listening quietly throughout this exchange despite understanding only fragments of the adult conversation happening around her, tugged gently at Damien's sleeve. Will you find my mommy? She asked, her voice small but hopeful in a way that tightened something painful within Damien's chest. He met her eyes directly, offering the only promise he intended to keep no matter the cost required to fulfill it. Yes, he said firmly. I will find her, Ren, no matter what it takes. Outside the castle walls, unseen by anyone within the private sitting room, a lone figure watched the lit windows of Damien's private chambers from a hidden vantage point along the outer wall, memorizing details before disappearing quietly into the surrounding darkness, to deliver a report to someone far more dangerous than Rourke Kane had ever been on his own. The journey north began 2 days later, once Damien had arranged sufficient protection for Ren within the castle, and selected a small, trusted group to accompany him toward the abandoned shrine Marla had described. He brought only Corin and 2 additional warriors, choosing discretion over strength in numbers, unwilling to draw unnecessary attention to a mission that depended entirely on remaining unnoticed. Marla rode with them as well, insisting she alone could recognize the exact location and interpret whatever coded message might await them, having spent years learning the subtle signals Elena had established long before Ren's birth. Damien had argued briefly against her presence, concerned for her safety given recent events, but Marla remained firm, unwilling to entrust something so delicate to strangers no matter how capable they claimed to be. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they traveled further north, thick forest giving way gradually to rocky hillside dotted with sparse vegetation clinging stubbornly to shallow soil. Damien found himself scanning the surrounding landscape constantly, alert for any sign that they were being followed or watched, unwilling to repeat the vulnerability that had nearly cost him everything during the earlier ambush. How much further? He asked Marla as the sun began climbing toward its midday position. Not much longer, she replied, studying the landscape carefully, as though confirming details against memory. The shrine sits within a small valley just beyond this ridge. It was abandoned generations ago, though local villagers still consider it sacred ground, which discourages most casual visitors. They crested the ridge shortly after, revealing a modest stone structure nestled within a shallow valley below, weathered by time but still recognizably a place of worship, its crumbling walls draped with vines that had grown wild over decades of neglect. Damien felt a strange stillness settle over the area, the kind of quiet that seemed to demand respect from anyone who entered. They descended carefully, tying their horses at a safe distance before approaching the shrine on foot. Marla led them directly toward a specific section of the ruined wall, running her fingers along weathered stone until she located a particular loose block that seemed unremarkable to anyone unaware of its significance. "Here," she said quietly, working the stone free with careful, practiced movements. "This is where messages have appeared before." She reached into the small hollow space behind the stone, and Damien watched with held breath as her fingers closed around something folded tightly, tucked deep enough to avoid casual discovery by anyone unaware of the hiding place's purpose. Marla withdrew a small piece of parchment, considerably newer than the letters Damien had already read, the paper crisp and unweathered despite its hidden location. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, and Damien moved closer, unable to contain his urgency any longer. The handwriting matched Elena's perfectly, though noticeably weaker than the confident script he remembered, as though written by someone whose strength had been significantly diminished by injury or illness. "Marla, if you find this message, know that I remain alive, though barely, and further north than before. I have learned that those hunting me have grown bolder recently, which suggests they may have discovered something about Ren's whereabouts. Please, if it is not too late, move her somewhere even more secure than our previous arrangement. I fear my own location may soon be compromised as well." Damien's chest tightened painfully as he read the words over Marla's shoulder, Elena's fear and desperation evident even through carefully controlled handwriting. She was alive, but clearly still running, still hiding from enemies who had apparently intensified their pursuit in recent months. "When was this left?" Damien asked urgently. Marla studied the parchment carefully, comparing details against her memory of previous messages. "Recently," she said. "Within the last few weeks, based on how fresh the paper appears compared to earlier notes I've collected here." "Does she give any indication of her exact location?" Damien pressed, desperate for any lead that might guide him toward Elena directly. Marla shook her head slowly. "She never has, likely for safety reasons. If these messages were ever intercepted, revealing her precise whereabouts would put her in immediate danger." Damien folded the parchment carefully, tucking it alongside the earlier letters he still carried close to his chest. Somewhere beyond this shrine, somewhere further north into territories he barely knew, Elena remained alive, wounded and afraid, still believing herself forced into permanent hiding by enemies who had never stopped hunting her. "We need to expand our search northward," Damien said firmly, addressing Corin and the accompanying warriors. "Elena is out there, and given what this message suggests, her situation may be growing increasingly desperate." Before Corin could respond, one of the accompanying warriors suddenly went rigid, his attention snapping toward the ridge above them. "Movement!" he warned sharply. "Along the tree line!" Damien's hand moved instantly to his weapon as he turned to assess the threat, his instincts sharpened by recent experience with ambush and betrayal. Several figures emerged from the surrounding forest, moving with the deliberate coordination that had characterized the earlier attack on his convoy, confirming that whoever hunted Elena had somehow anticipated this exact location and moment. "They knew we would come here," Corin said grimly, positioning himself protectively near Marla. "This wasn't coincidence." "Which means someone within our own ranks reported our destination," Damien said, anger flaring hot beneath his controlled exterior. "Someone close enough to know our plans before we departed." The attackers descended quickly, clearly intending to prevent Damien's group from leaving with whatever information they had recovered from the shrine. Damien met the first assault directly, his blade moving with practiced precision as he fought to protect both his warriors and the vital message now tucked safely within his coat. The battle proved brief but intense, Damien's smaller group fighting with the desperate determination born from understanding exactly what was at stake. Corin fought fiercely beside Marla, ensuring she remained protected throughout the chaotic exchange, while Damien pressed forward against increasingly desperate opponents who seemed to understand that failure here carried severe consequences from whoever had ordered this mission. When the fighting finally subsided, 3 attackers lay defeated while the remaining few retreated hastily into the surrounding forest, apparently unwilling to risk further losses against opponents clearly more skilled than anticipated. Damien approached the fallen attackers cautiously, searching for any identifying information that might reveal who had orchestrated this second assault. Among their belongings, he discovered something far more valuable than another sealed letter bearing Rourke's household emblem. A small medallion, crafted from dark metal and bearing an unfamiliar symbol neither Damien nor Corin immediately recognized, hung from a leather cord around the fallen leader's neck. Damien studied it carefully, memorizing every detail of its unusual design. "I've never seen this symbol before," Corin admitted, examining the medallion closely. "It doesn't belong to any pack or faction I'm familiar with." "Which suggests whoever commands these attackers operates entirely outside recognized pack structures," Damien said grimly, turning the medallion over in his palm. Elena was right. Rourke is merely a piece within something considerably larger and more organized than a single ambitious cousin seeking succession. Marla, still shaken from the sudden violence, approached cautiously to examine the medallion herself. Her expression shifted suddenly to one of dawning recognition, her breath catching sharply. "I've seen this symbol before," she said quietly. "Elena mentioned it once, during her fevered recovery after Ren's birth. She said it belonged to something called the Hollow Circle, though she never explained further before losing consciousness." Damien's grip tightened around the medallion, a new and unfamiliar name now added to the growing list of mysteries surrounding Elena's disappearance, and the conspiracy threatening his daughter's life. Whatever the Hollow Circle represented, it had apparently existed long enough and grown powerful enough to orchestrate a conspiracy spanning 5 years, multiple attacks, and connections reaching directly into his own pack's leadership structure. "We return to Blackthorn immediately," Damien decided, tucking the medallion safely alongside Elena's letters. "I need answers about this Hollow Circle, and I suspect Rourke knows considerably more than he has admitted so far." As they mounted their horses and began the return journey, Damien found himself contemplating the growing complexity of the danger surrounding his family. What had begun as a simple, devastating loss 5 years ago had transformed into something far more elaborate and dangerous than he had ever imagined. A conspiracy reaching beyond his own pack's borders into territories and organizations he barely understood. Somewhere north of their current position, Elena remained hidden, wounded and afraid, unaware that her daughter had finally been found, and that her mate now pursued the truth with a determination that would not rest until every enemy responsible for their 5 years of separation had been identified and confronted directly. Blackthorn Castle greeted their return with the same deceptive calm that had settled over it before Damien's departure, though he now viewed every familiar corridor and every friendly face with a wariness he had never before applied to his own home. Somewhere within these walls, someone had informed Rourke's associates of his exact destination, someone trusted enough to know his private plans, yet willing to sell that information to enemies actively hunting his family. He wasted no time confronting his cousin directly, summoning Rourke to his private study within an hour of returning, unwilling to allow the man additional opportunity to prepare elaborate excuses or coordinate his response with unknown allies. Rourke arrived composed as always, though Damien noted a slight stiffness in his posture that suggested awareness of the seriousness behind this unexpected summons. "Cousin," Rourke said carefully, taking the seat Damien gestured toward. "I understand your journey north proved eventful." "You understand correctly," Damien said, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth toward family. He placed the medallion recovered from the ambush directly onto the table between them, watching carefully for any reaction. "Perhaps you can explain why attackers bearing your household seal pursued my convoy, and why a second group carrying this particular medallion ambushed us near an abandoned shrine that only a handful of people knew we intended to visit." Rourke's composure flickered, just slightly, though he recovered quickly. "I have no knowledge of any such medallion," he said smoothly. "And regarding the seal, my household's correspondence has been compromised before. Someone could easily have stolen or forged such a seal to implicate me falsely. A convenient explanation," Damien said coldly. Yet strangely similar to the explanation offered 5 years ago, when Elena's death was attributed entirely to enemy raiders, rather than the calculated elimination it now appears to have been. Rourke's expression shifted subtly, something colder flickering behind his carefully maintained composure. "You cannot seriously believe I had anything to do with Elena's death," he said, though his voice lacked the outraged conviction Damien might have expected from genuine innocence. "I believe considerably more than I am currently willing to share," Damien said evenly. "But understand this clearly, cousin. If I discover proof connecting you directly to the conspiracy against my mate and my daughter, no blood relation will protect you from the consequences you deserve." Rourke rose slowly, his jaw tightening with barely controlled tension. "You are chasing shadows, Damien, driven by grief and desperate hope rather than genuine evidence. I understand the temptation to believe Elena might somehow still be alive, but I fear you are allowing that hope to cloud your judgment dangerously." "We shall see," Damien said simply, allowing his cousin to depart without further confrontation. unwilling to reveal the full extent of evidence he had already gathered, until he understood precisely how deep this conspiracy truly extended. Once Rourke had gone, Corin entered from an adjoining room where he had listened to the entire exchange. "He's frightened," Corin observed. "Beneath that composure, I saw genuine fear when you mentioned the medallion directly." "As did I," Damien agreed, "which confirms he recognizes its significance, regardless of his claimed ignorance. But fear alone will not force a confession from someone as calculating as my cousin has always been." "Then how do we proceed?" Corin asked. Before Damien could answer, a sharp cry echoed from somewhere deeper within the castle, immediately recognizable as Wren's voice, carrying unmistakable terror through the stone corridors. Damien's blood turned to ice as he moved instantly toward the sound, Corin close behind him, both men abandoning all previous caution in favor of immediate action. They found Marla struggling against an unfamiliar figure within Wren's private chambers, the intruder having apparently gained access through a servant's passage rarely used, and easily overlooked during the castle's recent security adjustments. Wren had retreated into the far corner of the room, small and terrified, while Marla fought desperately to prevent the intruder from reaching the child she had protected for 5 years. Damien crossed the distance in seconds, his fury lending him speed that overwhelmed the intruder's defenses almost instantly. He subdued the attacker with brutal efficiency, restraining the man firmly enough to prevent escape while ensuring he remained alive for questioning. "Wren," Damien said urgently, turning immediately toward his daughter, who remained pressed against the corner, trembling violently. He knelt before her, careful to keep his voice gentle despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Wren launched herself into his arms, sobbing quietly against his shoulder, and Damien held her tightly, silently vowing that this would be the last time anyone managed to breach whatever protection he arranged around his daughter. Once Wren had calmed sufficiently and been settled safely with additional guards stationed directly outside her chambers, Damien turned his full attention toward the captured intruder, who remained restrained and increasingly nervous under the combined scrutiny of Blackthorn's Alpha King and his Beta. "Who sent you?" Damien demanded, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the prisoner flinch visibly. The man remained silent initially, though Corin's pointed reminder regarding the severe penalties awaiting anyone caught attempting harm against pack royalty eventually loosened his tongue considerably. "I was hired," the man admitted reluctantly, "through an intermediary. I never met whoever ultimately commanded the operation directly." "But you know something," Damien pressed. "Enough to have accepted this assignment specifically." The prisoner hesitated, clearly weighing the danger of speaking against the danger of remaining silent. "I was told the child represented a threat to certain arrangements," he finally admitted. "Arrangements involving succession within Blackthorn leadership." "Rourke," Corin said flatly, though the prisoner shook his head quickly. "Not directly," the man clarified. "The instructions came through someone claiming to represent a group called the Hollow Circle. I never learned who specifically commands that organization, only that they compensate well for discretion and results." Damien exchanged a grim glance with Corin, the mention of the Hollow Circle confirming the connection they had already suspected following the earlier ambush. Whoever led this organization operated carefully, insulating themselves through multiple layers of intermediaries, making direct evidence maddeningly difficult to obtain. "Where can we find this intermediary who hired you?" Damien demanded. The prisoner's expression turned genuinely fearful for the first time. "I don't know if he's still alive," he admitted. "The Hollow Circle eliminates loose ends quickly. If I had failed here, I suspect I would have been silenced as thoroughly as anyone else who becomes inconvenient to their plans." Damien ordered the prisoner secured for further questioning, though he suspected the man had already revealed everything genuinely useful he possessed. As guards escorted the intruder away, Damien turned toward Corin, his expression grim with new determination. "This organization has infiltrated our security, hired assassins willing to target a child, and apparently maintains connections deep enough within Blackthorn to know our private movements before we make them," Damien said. "This goes far beyond Rourke's personal ambitions." "Then how do we fight an enemy we cannot clearly identify?" Corin asked. "We start by watching Rourke more carefully than ever," Damien said. "If he truly serves this Hollow Circle, rather than merely benefiting from their actions, he will eventually reveal something useful, whether through carelessness or desperation as pressure increases around him." That evening, as Damien sat beside Wren's bed, watching her finally drift into exhausted sleep despite the day's terrifying events, he found himself more determined than ever to unravel every layer of conspiracy surrounding his family. Somewhere within this castle, someone continued feeding information to enemies, determined to destroy everything he had only just begun rebuilding. He would find them. Whatever it required, however long it took, Damien intended to ensure that Ren never again faced danger within walls that were supposed to guarantee her safety above all else. 3 days after the attempted attack on Ren within the castle itself, Damien summoned the full Pack Council to the Great Hall, a formal gathering reserved only for matters of significant consequence to Blackthorn's future. Word of his intentions had spread quickly through the castle, whispered speculation filling every corridor as council members and senior warriors alike gathered to witness whatever announcement their king intended to make. Damien entered the hall with Ren beside him, her small hand held firmly within his own, while Marla followed closely behind, her expression carrying equal parts pride and lingering anxiety. Corin flanked Damien's other side, positioned to intervene immediately should any threat emerge during this deliberately public declaration. The assembled council quieted as Damien took his position at the head of the hall, Ren standing close beside him despite the intimidating rows of unfamiliar faces surrounding her. Rourke stood among the council members, his expression carefully neutral, though Damien noted the barely perceptible tension in his cousin's shoulders as the gathering's purpose became increasingly obvious. 5 years ago, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. I lost my mate, Elena Hartley, during what I believed was a random enemy raid along our northern border. I have since learned that her death was neither random nor accidental, but rather the calculated result of a conspiracy, determined to prevent an heir of my bloodline from ever being born. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council, though Damien continued without pause, his attention deliberately fixed on Rourke's reaction throughout the announcement. That conspiracy failed, Damien said firmly. Elena survived long enough to give birth to our daughter before circumstances forced her into hiding to protect the child from further danger. That daughter stands beside me now. He gestured toward Ren, who straightened slightly under the sudden weight of every gaze within the hall turning toward her small, uncertain figure. Damien felt her hand tighten within his own and squeezed gently in silent reassurance. This is Ren Voss, Damien announced, using their family name deliberately for the first time. My daughter and rightful heir to Blackthorn leadership. I claim her formally before this council, and I expect every member present to recognize and protect her status accordingly. The silence that followed felt heavy with implication, particularly for anyone within the room who understood exactly how dramatically this announcement altered existing expectations regarding Pack succession. Rourke's expression remained carefully controlled, though Damien caught the subtle tightening around his cousin's eyes that betrayed genuine alarm beneath practiced composure. An elder council member, a woman named Cordelia who had served Blackthorn leadership through multiple generations, rose slowly from her seat. My lord, she said carefully, such a significant claim requires verification beyond simple declaration, particularly given the unusual circumstances surrounding the child's discovery. Damien had anticipated exactly this challenge. I understand the council's need for certainty, he said, which is why I have arranged for a blood-scent confirmation ritual, to be conducted immediately before this assembly, removing any possible doubt regarding Ren's parentage. The ritual itself was ancient, reserved for situations exactly like this one, where questions of bloodline and succession required absolute certainty beyond simple testimony or circumstantial evidence. A designated elder, trained specifically in the ritual's proper execution, stepped forward carrying a small ceremonial blade and shallow silver bowl. Damien extended his arm without hesitation, allowing the elder to draw a small amount of blood into the waiting bowl. Ren watched with wide, uncertain eyes as the same brief procedure was performed on her own small hand, her whimper of discomfort quickly soothed by Damien's steady presence beside her. The elder combined both samples carefully within the ceremonial bowl, murmuring ancient words that had been passed down through countless generations of Pack tradition, words designed to reveal true bloodline connection, through methods far more reliable than simple visual comparison or circumstantial testimony. The assembled council watched in tense silence as the combined blood began to swirl and shift within the silver bowl, eventually settling into a pattern that every experienced Pack member present recognized immediately as confirmation of genuine, undeniable parentage. The ritual confirms it, the elder announced solemnly. This child carries Alpha Voss's bloodline beyond any possible doubt. A wave of reaction moved through the assembled council, some expressions shifting toward genuine warmth and acceptance, others remaining carefully neutral in ways that made Damien wonder how many additional loyalties within his own council might be compromised by connections to the Hollow Circle's shadowy influence. Rourke stepped forward then, his expression composed despite what Damien suspected was considerable internal turmoil. "If the ritual confirms her bloodline," Rourke said carefully, "then Blackthorn welcomes its future heir. I offer my congratulations, cousin, and my continued loyalty to you and your daughter both." The words sounded appropriately gracious, yet Damien detected something calculating beneath his cousin's carefully chosen phrasing, an awareness that public opposition now would only draw unwanted suspicion toward himself given everything Damien had already begun investigating privately. "Thank you, cousin," Damien replied evenly, matching Rourke's careful diplomacy while silently noting that this public acceptance changed nothing regarding his private suspicions. Cordelia, still processing the ritual's undeniable confirmation, addressed the council directly. "Given this confirmation, formal protections must be extended immediately to ensure the young heir's safety. Any threat against her now constitutes direct treason against Blackthorn leadership itself." Damien nodded firmly. "Precisely my intention. Effective immediately, Ren receives full royal protection, equivalent to any threat I myself would warrant as Alpha King. Anyone found conspiring against her safety will face the harshest penalties our laws allow." The declaration carried clear warning toward anyone within the hall who might harbor connections to the conspiracy still threatening his daughter, though Damien understood that genuine enemies rarely announced themselves through obvious reaction to such warnings. Whoever truly commanded the Hollow Circle would likely respond with increased caution rather than open confrontation, adapting their strategy to account for Ren's newly formalized protection. As the council gathering concluded, various members approaching to offer formal acknowledgement and welcome toward their newly confirmed young heir, Damien watched Ren navigate the overwhelming attention with surprising resilience for someone her age, her natural curiosity gradually overcoming initial shyness, as genuinely warm council members knelt to speak with her directly. Marla remained close throughout, her presence clearly providing Ren with essential comfort amid such dramatic upheaval to everything she had previously understood about her own identity and circumstances. Later that evening, once the formal proceedings had concluded and Ren had finally settled into exhausted sleep following an overwhelming day, Damien met privately with Corin to discuss the ritual's broader implications. "Formal recognition protects her legally," Corin observed, "but it also makes her an even more obvious target for anyone determined to prevent your bloodline from securing Blackthorn's future permanently." "I am aware of the risk," Damien acknowledged. "But leaving her vulnerable through secrecy proved equally dangerous, as we've already witnessed twice now. At least with formal recognition, any future attack against her carries severe legal consequences that might discourage less committed adversaries." "And Rourke?" Corin asked pointedly. Damien's expression hardened slightly. "His public acceptance changes nothing regarding my private suspicions. If anything, cornering him publicly may force him toward increasingly desperate action, which could finally provide the concrete evidence we still lack." "A dangerous strategy," Corin observed. "Perhaps," Damien agreed, "but I have run out of patience for subtlety, Corin. Every day this conspiracy remains unresolved is another day Elena continues suffering in hiding. Another day Ren remains genuinely vulnerable despite whatever protection we manage to arrange around her." As Damien retired for the evening, his thoughts drifted inevitably toward Elena, wherever she remained hidden throughout the Northern Territories, unaware that her daughter had finally been formally recognized and protected within the very walls that had once represented such danger to them both. He intended to find her, whatever obstacles the Hollow Circle placed before him, and he suspected that Rourke, now cornered and increasingly desperate, might soon provide the exact opportunity needed to unravel this conspiracy completely. The confrontation came sooner than Damien expected, triggered by a discovery Corin made only 2 days after the formal council gathering. While reviewing recent correspondence records maintained by castle staff, Corin noticed an irregularity in message deliveries traced back to Rourke's private quarters, timestamps that corresponded suspiciously closely with each significant development in their ongoing investigation. "He's been sending messages immediately after every private discussion we've had regarding the Hollow Circle," Corin reported urgently, finding Damien in his study late that evening. "Someone within his household staff has been carrying correspondence to a location outside castle grounds within hours of our private conversations." Damien's expression darkened considerably, which confirms he still maintains active communication with whoever commands this conspiracy, he said. "Perhaps it's finally time to force his hand directly." They moved quickly, gathering a small contingent of trusted warriors before proceeding toward Rourke's private quarters within the castle's eastern wing. Damien intended to confront his cousin directly, hoping that sudden pressure without warning might finally crack the careful composure Rourke had maintained throughout every previous conversation. They arrived to find Rourke's chambers in obvious disarray, drawers pulled open hastily, several personal items apparently gathered quickly into a travel case still sitting open upon his bed. Rourke himself stood near the window, clearly preparing for hurried departure, his expression shifting from surprise to resigned calculation, as Damien entered accompanied by armed warriors. "Going somewhere, cousin?" Damien asked coldly, his hand resting deliberately near his weapon. Rourke's shoulders sagged slightly, years of careful pretense finally beginning to crack under the weight of undeniable discovery. "Damien," he said quietly, "whatever you believe you've uncovered, I can explain." "Then explain," Damien said, his voice carrying dangerous restraint. "Explain the messages sent immediately following our private discussions. Explain the sealed correspondence bearing your household's emblem discovered on attackers who ambushed my convoy. Explain your obvious preparation for sudden departure at this exact moment." Rourke remained silent for a long, tense moment, clearly calculating whether continued denial served any remaining purpose given the overwhelming evidence Damien had already assembled. Finally, something within him seemed to break, exhaustion replacing calculated composure entirely. "I never intended for Elena to die," Rourke said quietly, his voice carrying genuine regret for perhaps the first time since Damien had begun this investigation. "I intended only to prevent your bloodline from securing succession, to preserve my own position as your rightful heir. I arranged the raid to appear as though it targeted Elena specifically, believing the resulting chaos would provide sufficient cover to eliminate her without suspicion falling directly upon myself." Damien's hands curled into fists, fury threatening to overwhelm his careful control. "You murdered her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You murdered the mother of my child to protect your own ambitions." "I believed I had," Rourke admitted, something like genuine anguish flickering across his features. "I was told she died in the fire, consumed entirely before she could escape. I did not know she survived long enough to give birth, did not know Ren existed until you brought her directly into this castle." "And the Hollow Circle?" Damien demanded. "Explain your connection to that organization." Rourke hesitated, fear flickering behind his eyes for the first time. "They approached me years ago," he admitted reluctantly, offering resources and support for my ambitions in exchange for occasional cooperation regarding matters that served their broader interests. I did not fully understand their true scope or purpose until it was already too late to extract myself safely. "Who commands them?" Damien pressed urgently. "Give me a name." Rourke shook his head slowly. "I never learned their leader's identity directly. Every instruction arrived through intermediaries, carefully insulated to prevent exactly this kind of exposure. I know only that their influence extends far beyond Blackthorn's borders, into territories and organizations I cannot begin to fully comprehend." Corin stepped forward, his expression carrying barely controlled anger of his own. "You allowed assassins to target a child," he said coldly. "Your own family's blood." "I did not order the attack against Ren directly," Rourke insisted, though his voice lacked genuine conviction. "That decision came from the Hollow Circle itself, once they learned of her existence and recognized the threat she posed to whatever broader plans they maintain. I merely failed to intervene, understanding that opposing them directly would likely result in my own elimination." Damien's fury remained barely contained, though a colder, more calculating part of his mind recognized the value of Rourke's continued cooperation, however reluctantly offered. "Elena's escape," he said. "Tell me everything you know about how she survived and where she might have gone." Rourke's expression shifted toward genuine confusion. "I assumed she died in the fire itself," he admitted. "I did not learn of her survival until this very investigation revealed it to me alongside everyone else. I have no knowledge of her current whereabouts." "But you know something about the Northern Territories," Damien pressed, recalling Elena's messages and the shrine where Marla had collected them over the years. "The Hollow Circle's influence extends there, doesn't it?" Rourke nodded slowly. "Their primary operations, from what limited information I've gathered over the years, center around territories considerably north of Blackthorn's borders, in regions largely unclaimed by established packs. If Elena has survived hiding from them for 5 years, she has likely remained within reach of considerable danger throughout that entire time." Damien absorbed this information carefully, understanding that Rourke's confession, however incomplete regarding the Hollow Circle's ultimate leadership, provided crucial confirmation regarding the general direction any further search for Elena needed to pursue. "You will be held accountable for your role in this conspiracy," Damien said firmly, addressing his cousin directly. "Blackthorn law demands severe consequences for treason of this magnitude, particularly treason resulting in attempted murder against pack royalty. Rourke's expression remained resigned rather than surprised, as though he had long anticipated this exact moment finally arriving despite years of careful concealment. "I understand," he said quietly. "Whatever judgment you deem appropriate, I will accept without further resistance." Damien ordered his cousin restrained and confined securely, unwilling to risk further escape attempts while the full council convened to determine appropriate consequences for treason spanning 5 years and multiple attempts against his own family's safety. As guards led Rourke away, Damien remained standing within the disturbed chambers, processing everything his cousin had finally revealed. "We know considerably more now," Corin observed quietly, though the Hollow Circle's true leadership remains frustratingly obscured. "But we know where to search," Damien said, determination replacing some of his earlier fury. "The Northern Territories, beyond established pack boundaries, exactly where Elena's messages have consistently originated." "You intend to search personally?" Corin asked, though his tone suggested he already anticipated Damien's answer. "I intend to find my mate," Damien said firmly. "Wherever she remains hidden, however dangerous the search proves to be. 5 years of separation, of grief built upon lies and manipulation, ends now. I will bring Elena home, whatever it requires." That evening, as formal proceedings began regarding Rourke's punishment, and the full council processed the shocking revelation of his betrayal, Damien prepared quietly for what he intended as his final journey toward reuniting with Elena. He gathered Corin and a carefully selected group of trusted warriors, arranged additional protection for Ren during his absence, and studied every scrap of information gathered throughout this exhausting investigation for any final clue that might guide him directly toward his mate's exact location. Somewhere within the vast Northern Territories, beyond the reach of established pack law and protection, Elena remained hidden, wounded and afraid, unaware that her daughter had been found, her would-be murderer exposed, and her mate now prepared to cross whatever distance separated them to bring her finally, permanently home. The Northern Territories stretched before Damien's search party like an endless expanse of wilderness, rugged and unforgiving, exactly the kind of landscape someone desperate to disappear completely might choose deliberately. They had traveled for 4 days since departing Blackthorn Castle, following every fragment of information Rourke's confession and Marla's memories had provided, searching for any sign that might lead them toward Elena's exact location. Damien rode at the front of the small group, his instincts sharpened by 5 years of grief now transformed into desperate hope. Corin remained close beside him, while 2 additional trackers, chosen specifically for their skill in reading subtle signs across difficult terrain, scouted ahead constantly for anything that might indicate recent human or shifter passage through this remote wilderness. They had found scattered clues along their journey, a discarded cloth bearing faint traces of a scent Damien recognized instantly, careful footprints leading toward increasingly remote shelter, small signs suggesting someone had passed through recently, while remaining deliberately cautious about leaving obvious traces behind. On the 5th day, one of the trackers returned from scouting ahead with urgent news. "There's a cabin," he reported, "well hidden within a narrow valley several hours further north. Smoke rises from its chimney, suggesting current habitation, though whoever lives there has clearly worked to keep the structure concealed from casual discovery." Damien's heart pounded with anticipation and fear in equal measure as they approached the location carefully, unwilling to risk startling whoever remained inside, or alerting any hidden threat that might still be monitoring the area. The cabin emerged gradually from the surrounding forest, small and weathered, nestled carefully within terrain that provided natural concealment from most directions. Damien dismounted at a cautious distance, gesturing for his warriors to remain back while he approached alone, unwilling to risk overwhelming whoever occupied this hidden dwelling with unnecessary intimidation. His heart hammered against his ribs as he moved closer, every instinct within him recognizing something achingly familiar carried faintly on the mountain breeze. The cabin door opened before he reached it, revealing an older woman, weathered by years of isolated living, who studied him with careful, guarded suspicion. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly, though something in her expression suggested she recognized exactly who stood before her despite years of separation. "I'm looking for someone," Damien said carefully, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "A woman named Elena. I have reason to believe she may be here, or nearby." The woman's expression shifted subtly, confirming Damien's desperate hope even before she spoke further. "Who are you to her?" she asked cautiously. "Her mate," Damien said simply, "the father of her daughter." The woman's guarded expression finally softened into something like relief mixed with lingering caution. "I am Ilsa," she said. I found Elena badly injured in these mountains years ago and have cared for her since, though her recovery has been slow and difficult given the severity of her original injuries. Is she here? Damien asked urgently, unable to contain the desperate hope flooding through him. Is she alive? Ilsa nodded slowly. She is inside, resting. She has grown stronger over recent months, though she remains weaker than she once was. I must warn you, the years have not been kind to her, both in body and in spirit. Damien barely heard the warning, his entire focus narrowing toward the cabin door behind Ilsa, toward the possibility that Elena, his Elena, remained just beyond that threshold after 5 years of believing her lost forever. May I see her? He asked, his voice barely steady. Ilsa studied him carefully for a long moment before finally stepping aside, granting silent permission. Damien moved past her with hands that trembled slightly, pushing open the cabin door to reveal a small, simply furnished interior, warmed by a modest fire crackling within a stone hearth. Elena sat near the window, thinner than he remembered, her once vibrant hair now streaked with premature gray, her posture carrying the careful stillness of someone who had lived through considerable pain. Yet when she turned toward the sound of the door opening, her eyes, still that same familiar shade of green Wren had inherited so perfectly, widened with an emotion that stole every remaining word from Damien's throat. Damien, she whispered, disbelief and desperate hope warring visibly across her features. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, kneeling beside her chair, his hands reaching for hers with a gentleness that belied the overwhelming emotion coursing through him. Elena, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I found you. I finally found you. Tears fell freely down her weathered cheeks as she reached toward him, her fingers trembling as they traced his familiar features, confirming through touch what her eyes had already told her. I never stopped believing you might find me eventually, she whispered, though I feared it would never truly happen. Wren led me to you, Damien said, emotion thickening his voice further. Our daughter, Elena, she's safe, she's healthy, she's waiting for us both back at Blackthorn. Elena's breath caught sharply, fresh tears spilling over as she absorbed this confirmation that her desperate sacrifice 5 years earlier had truly succeeded in protecting their daughter. She's safe, Elena repeated, as though needing to hear the words confirmed aloud to fully believe them real. After everything, she's truly safe? Completely safe, Damien confirmed, formally recognized before the entire council, protected under Blackthorn law, and desperately hoping to finally meet the mother she has only heard about through stories until now. Elena's expression crumbled with overwhelming relief and lingering grief for everything the conspiracy had stolen from their family across 5 painful years. I never wanted to leave her, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted to leave either of you. I believed it was the only way to keep her alive. You were right, Damien said gently, pressing his forehead against hers, breathing in the familiar scent he had missed desperately throughout every lonely night across 5 years of grief. Your sacrifice saved her life, and now, finally, we can be together again, properly, as a family. He explained quickly the events that had unfolded since Wren's discovery, Rourke's confession and exposure, the ongoing mystery surrounding the Hollow Circle's true leadership, and the formal protection now surrounding their daughter within Blackthorn Castle. Elena listened intently, her expression shifting through relief, lingering fear, and finally, cautious hope as she began understanding the full scope of everything Damien had uncovered and accomplished, in pursuit of bringing their family back together. The Hollow Circle remains a threat, Elena said seriously, once Damien had finished his explanation. Their reach extends further than you likely realize, Damien. We cannot assume this danger has ended simply because Rourke has been exposed. I understand, Damien said firmly, but we will face whatever remains of that threat together, as a family, rather than separated by fear and secrecy as we have been forced to endure these past 5 years. Ilsa, who had remained respectfully near the doorway throughout this emotional reunion, finally spoke quietly. She will need continued care during her recovery, she said. Her injuries, while significantly healed, have left lasting effects that time alone will need to continue addressing. Then she will receive whatever care she requires, Damien said firmly. Within Blackthorn's walls, surrounded by proper healers and the safety our combined strength can provide, rather than isolated within remote wilderness any longer. Elena reached for his hand again, squeezing gently despite her obvious physical weakness. Take me home, Damien, she said softly. Take me to our daughter. The journey back toward Blackthorn Castle proceeded carefully, accommodating Elena's continued physical limitations while Damien's warriors maintained constant vigilant watch against any possible threat the Hollow Circle might still attempt against their reunited family. Elena rode gently beside Damien, drawing strength from his presence after years of isolated survival, while Corin and the remaining warriors formed a protective formation around them throughout the multi-day return journey. They arrived at Blackthorn Castle late in the afternoon, the familiar towers rising welcomingly against a clear sky that seemed to promise better days ahead despite whatever challenges still remained regarding the Hollow Circle's ultimate defeat. Word of their approach had clearly preceded them, for Marla waited anxiously within the main courtyard, Ren standing close beside her, both watching the approaching riders with visible anticipation. Damien dismounted first, moving quickly to assist Elena down carefully, mindful of her continued fragility despite the joy evident across her tired features. Ren, unable to contain her excitement any longer despite Marla's gentle restraining hand, broke free and ran directly toward the unfamiliar woman she somehow instinctively recognized despite having no clear memory of her. "Mommy?" Ren asked uncertainly, stopping just before reaching Elena, suddenly shy despite her earlier eagerness. Elena knelt slowly, ignoring the physical strain the movement clearly caused her, reaching toward her daughter with trembling hands and an expression of overwhelming love 5 years of separation had done nothing to diminish. "Yes, my darling," Elena said softly, tears flowing freely once again. "I'm your mommy. I've been waiting so long to finally hold you again." Ren closed the remaining distance quickly, throwing her small arms around Elena's neck, and Elena embraced her daughter fully, for the first time since those brief, desperate moments immediately following her birth 5 years earlier. Damien watched the reunion with his own eyes brimming with emotion, Corin standing respectfully nearby, and Marla wiping tears from her own weathered cheeks at finally witnessing the moment she had worked so hard across 5 difficult years to eventually make possible. "You really do smell just like flowers after rain," Ren whispered against her mother's shoulder, echoing words she had once used to identify Damien's familiar scent that fateful day beside the ruined well. Elena laughed softly through her tears, holding her daughter tightly. "And you smell like hope, my darling," she whispered back, "like everything I fought so hard to protect." Damien moved closer, wrapping his arms carefully around both Elena and Ren, finally holding his complete family together, after 5 years of grief, lies, and desperate searching. Whatever challenges remained, whatever threat the Hollow Circle still posed toward their future, he understood clearly that they would face everything together now, as they always should have from the very beginning. "Welcome home," he whispered, pressing gentle kisses first against Elena's forehead, then against Ren's soft hair. "Welcome home, both of you. Finally, truly, welcome home." As evening settled over Blackthorn Castle, warm light spilling from countless windows across a courtyard finally filled with genuine joy rather than lingering fear, Damien allowed himself, for the first time in 5 long years, to simply exist within a moment of pure happiness, surrounded by the family he had once believed permanently lost, now finally, completely restored. The Hollow Circle remained out there somewhere, their ultimate purposes and leadership still shrouded in dangerous mystery. But for tonight, within these ancient walls that had witnessed both tragedy and triumph across countless generations, the Alpha King of Blackthorn Pack held his mate and his daughter close, grateful beyond words for a reunion he had once feared would never come, and ready to protect this newfound happiness with everything he possessed.